normal. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos,
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Here.
Mr. Nord, Ms. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Harris, Mr. Preston, Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
First item to discuss is the underpass, no public comment tonight. So the underpass project lighting and plaza space is our first topic for this work session. Ms. Rees, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Council, I'm going to invite Mr. Otto to come forward and Ms. Wisman maybe to come forward. We've got some things that we want to talk to you about regarding the underpass project. We have some slides that show what the underpass design is expected to look like, but there's some details regarding the project that we want to discuss with you to see if you have any strong opinions one way or the other. This particularly relates to the lighting component of the tunnel area and what that experience is intended to be, and also the North Plaza space, the area we currently call Mark Peterson Plaza. There's a area in the plaza that will be primarily seating, benches, tables, and the like. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that space. Certainly in our overall project budget, we expect the tunnel to be lit, to be safe, to be, a comfortable destination to go from point A to point B. But there are some details that we want to get council's reaction and see if you have any opinions or would like anything changed. So with that, I'm going to roll it to Mr. Otto, who's going to start the conversation, and then we just have things we want to share with you and some slides that will give you some ideas of what things could be, and we'll go from there. Mr. Otto?
This opportunity, as Ms. Reese mentioned, to update you on the project, show you some new renderings that have not been shared in prior presentations, and then move into some of the realm of possibility with the tunnel lighting and the North Plaza space next to the CDM. You might recall that we had an online survey back in the winter and early spring of 2022. We had amazing participation. Over 3,400 people visited the survey online, and 1,600 people submitted feedback for that. So on this slide, you see kind of the high-ranking results, the highest ranking for each category that we surveyed folks for. The priority for the project was, of course, station access to the Amtrak station. South Plaza would be events, festivals, markets. South Plaza amenities, highest priority was shaded seating in that area. And North Plaza, water elements, and the underpass experience, special lighting garnered the most votes. This is a rendering you've seen before. It shows the general location of the accessible route through the underpass area, showing the South Plaza there on the bottom of the slide and progressing north under the tracks through the tunnel to the Uptown Circle area in the North Plaza. This is a similar rendering of that area showing the North Plaza in particular and the two avenues that people can take. You can see the purple shaded area brings you to that mid-level North Plaza area that we'll talk a little bit about later. But then on the sweeping around the entire plaza on the north, west, and south sides is the actual accessible ramp coming out of the tunnel. This is a new rendering showing both the North Plaza and the South Plaza. The North Plaza is on the bottom, so we're not looking north, we're actually looking south from Uptown Circle. You can see some of the general improvements on the south side. You can see it on the north side, some of the trees and some of the seating area that's planned with the project right now. But you can also see the entrance to the tunnel. And the North Plaza is shown here. You can see some of the passive space that's programmed in there right now. And we want to talk a little bit more a little later about, the realm of possibility for the North Plaza area as well. This is a rendering from that middle area.
Could you go back for just 1 second?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
On this slide, the middle area is what I'm going to talk about next on this next slide. So if you can put yourself coming down that ramp to where the picnic tables are shown, just kind of as a placeholder for that area. This next slide is what you might see looking towards the railroad tracks from that middle area, the middle tier, if you would, of the North Plaza. You can see some of the mezzanine, if you would, yes. Just looking at you can see the canopy. Interesting enough, the canopy will actually have to be removed for this project, but then it'll be reinstalled as part of the project. So the canopy will be back over the platform, and then you see a rendering of the new wall that will be built to contain both the tracks, but also allow for the ramp down to the underpass to be constructed.
Are the decorative elements in the piers, are those lights or just,
Those are not lights.
Okay.
Those are decorative elements, most likely stone. I don't think that's completely been determined yet. This is a rendering looking out from the station, from the Amtrak waiting area, into the North Plaza. So you can see the CDM in the distance, and you see except the ramp, the walking path on the outside coming down to the Uptown Circle. If you're on the platform, that will be right up against the station, so you can still walk from the north platform all the way to Uptown Circle. As part of this, you don't have to come and enter the building. This is the South Plaza. It's rendered as if you're standing on top of the existing police station or Parks and Rec building. That's the viewpoint of this plaza. You can see the South train, the Amtrak station. You can see some of the landscape areas. Accessible parking is on the right. The one feature is this little turnaround as one idea that we're toying around with for a drop-off for the South Station, but also the CDM and the train station for passenger cars. This would not be accessible for buses, just passenger cars. But you can also see, some of the elements on the north side of the Parks and Rec, a lot of convergence of areas, also some features to, kind of designate where that trail is to help control traffic a little bit, some islands and things like that. So we're thinking about those things as well. This is a rendering, not quite at the bottom of the South Plaza, but looking to the north towards the Amtrak station, Uptown Station, City Hall. You can see the terraced areas, you can see the steps, and you can see the underpass looking out towards the North Plaza. And I recognize I'm going fast. Are there any questions thus far?
We have a wonderful Parks and Rec department.
Yes, nice straight edges, beautiful topiary. Next slide, please. Here is some, not renderings this time, these are actual spaces in real life that kind of capture a little bit of what it could look like. Obviously, our space is different, but these are actual photographs of places that are in existence today as far as trail areas, landscaping, trees, terraced seating areas in terms of amphitheaters. Next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit tonight about two items. One is the underpass itself and the lighting, and then also the North Plaza. This slide is intended to kind of get us thinking about what could be. These are some areas of things that we would consider budgeted. These are items that, as Ms. Reese shared earlier, the underpass will be lighted well, it will be safe, and it will be nice. These are some ideas for that that the architect has put forward. So you can kind of see on the left is an entrance, although I would not consider that well lit. that's just
A daytime show.
a daytime shot. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wisman. And then on the right, you can move around some of the activities. We want it to be an engaging space, a well-lit space that moves people through. The lower left is, and I do want to preface the lower left is that our underpass does not have an arch top. It will be flat. The actual dimensions of the underpass are 10 feet high by 20 feet wide. So we are talking a significant amount of width. There'll be plenty of room for folks to get through there and move.
Is there just not enough room to do a barrel roof like that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're balancing depth. So we would need more depth to do something like that. And you balance depth with accessibility. So the deeper we get, the longer ramp is needed for that area.
In that particular slide, we pulled out just to show you that, basic lighting still can be adequate and it can be fine and make for a nice, pleasant experience going through the tunnel. Not exactly apples for apples because we will have a flat, roof, as Ryan indicated, and not an arch roof. But these were just examples of kind of basic lighting that can still be a pleasant experience. And of course, as we have said, the budget does allow for lighting, and it will be a lit space. So these were just examples of kind of what tunnels can look and kind of the environment, the atmosphere of the tunnel just by having it lit from the top kind of experience.
If you make these available, can you identify where some of these pictures are taken? Because I think one of them might be the Denver, Colorado Amtrak station.
I can check into that. I'm not sure that I have that. I don't have that information readily available. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the same slide we saw earlier with showing the ramp going down and around the northwest and south sides, but in particular that center area that we would like to discuss tonight. And right now we're showing a passive space, a space that certainly will be very functional and well lit, usable in terms of open space. But Ms. Wisman here in a moment is going to share some other thoughts and ideas, but we would certainly welcome feedback on some of the opportunities that we have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Wisman.
Yeah, in many ways, this is a shared space. This is a public space where we're able to come together and use it not unlike what we've used the circle as. There's an opportunity to gather, there's an opportunity for passive activity, maybe more active activity. The amphitheater on the other side is probably more likely where you're going to have music performed, but in this space there could be other activities that are not alien to Uptown Normal. Specifically in the tunnel space and the underpass space where our pedestrians and cyclists will be moving through in this shared space, there are other opportunities. So Mr. Otto had mentioned the public input sessions that we've had. We had a public meeting, we've had the survey where lighting specifically was brought up as well as color and art. So we worked just to get a few ideas put together to show you some concepts, because as it is designed and as it is budgeted, it has all of the lighting components, the safety components, and it is attractive. But with the public saying they're interested in seeing maybe something different or maybe enhanced in the space, we are looking for some consideration and direction on what that might be. What are you comfortable with? What areas and what direction should we be moving in? Because all of the enhancements would then have a price tag attached to that. So we're trying to figure out where you want to go, how comfortable you are, and what you're hoping to get from us as a staff. So these are different options that are out there. It shows a blending of different use of light, different use of art, as far as paint, mosaic, although we were told mosaic under the train might not be the smartest idea. A lot of vibrations could be a real maintenance headache, so Mark Clinch told me to say no. I'm kidding, he did not. But the professionals we talked to suggested that something like this would be a better approach if that's something we're looking for. So this is one look. Special lighting specifically was the number one thing that the public was interested in seeing in this space. We jokingly call it the magical portal at the Children's Discovery Museum because it doesn't exist yet. But these are examples of indoor and outdoor lighting schemes that have been used in public transit, that are celebrated, that people really enjoy. You might recognize O'Hare. It is 20, 30 years old installation. People still enjoy it, and it's well maintained, and it's just as it's inspiring when you come to it today as it was before. So these spaces have the opportunity to be transformational. They have the opportunity to be inspiring, but these, as you see them today, are not included in the current budget. So we would have to go about finding other funding mechanisms or figuring out that what even is possible. But again, that's hard to do unless we know what you're interested in and giving us some scope of what could be. These are just renderings of, again, possibilities, just to give you an actual situational experience being inside the underpass area. So if we were to do something with texture, we've talked about there in the budget, there is texture, opportunities for the flooring. Yes, there will be lighting, but will it be something like this? These are just, again, some concepts. To go a little more basic, but still enhanced, lighting can be changed in a lot of ways to take advantage, even with white lighting, the type of color balance that you have, how it's spreading out. The lower left hand is actually a series of light rods that are embedded into the concrete. So there are very different ways that you can go about with playing with the finish. Even in the barreled one in the middle, there are some lighting techniques we can still use to create a faux finish that is kind of cool, and it might be on the less expensive side of options. And we can go very basic, as you can see in some of these, and still maintain a unique look. So the upper right, you kind of have that puzzled look where it's, like a piano keys going down with the lighting and the shadows playing with each other. As long as you have enough lighting and appropriate lighting in that space, darkness actually can play as a benefit. Another option to look at and consider of just some unique lighting opportunities if we were to play with our Uptown logo. And then more of that, how are we picking materials? How are we thinking about the lighting? Do we want it from the top? Do we want it from the bottom? Do we like a minimalist approach? Do we want to create the sense of, like, the middle piece is designed so that you almost have a sense of going down a longer tunnel, even though it isn't. But it creates an optical illusion. Light is great at helping us create optical illusions. So we can play with that with different materials, but it's not as colorful, for instance. So is color what we're looking for? Is, just really good, solid, good white lighting, is that something we're looking for? And knowing that we do have in the budget some materials flexibility in what we select there. For the plaza on the north side, where that apron, the white spot was, that will not be white. If we decide to keep it as it currently is budgeted, it will be, what did we say the color was?
Buff.
Buff. It will match the rest of the yes, it will match the rest of the plaza. But there are opportunities in that space that we talked about when we presented the public art plan almost a year ago, right? We talked about the underpass represented art opportunities. The North Plaza presented art opportunities. There are ways to try to go about funding that, and one example I will talk about is exterior play. So what you're looking at are massive installations that can take on the look of art, and certainly in some cases truly are art. You can see the person in the picture there with the bear and his log slide. That's just one example. But these are examples of massive installations that can really bring life to a space in an artistic way. This is one specific company that I'm aware of called Monstrum. But there are artists who can create large-scale installations like this that are that we can play on. And we would have to work with Parks and Rec to make sure we had certain, materials for fall standards. But in this specific case, if we were to work on something like this idea came out of the master planning process that had a lot of public input from the Children's Discovery Museum. So the families that participated in our surveys and in our workshops were specifically asking for outdoor play experiences, which we really don't have right now. And so the Plaza presented an opportunity to at least investigate. So a large-scale piece is certainly possible. And then the idea of small-scale pieces also is possible. This could complement something that we're already working on in our outside space, our very sliver of green space behind the Children's Museum. But you can see that looking at natural materials and thinking about what's already present in the circle, the trees, the plantings that are already budgeted for within the North Plaza, there are things that can complement that, but have it be, again, passive in a sense that it can be beautiful, it can be fun, it can be unexpected. I always like unexpected, but also active. So it can be active, and some of these things can be active almost all year round. And that is a really important feature when you're talking about the center of our urban space, our business district, our community. So these are just, again, inspiration boards. And then a passive idea, would require, a different type of approach. Again, this is not necessarily in the current budget, but going about it in that public art standpoint, discussing purchasing, leasing, commissioning, public art that might be part of a passive space. This is a specific space with a lot of trees. The art canopy wouldn't necessarily look exactly like this because we're more tiered as far as like covering everything. But it certainly does show trees and art obviously being together, creating, this same area has some tables and chairs, using that negative space above the plaza area to have some other type of architectural technique. There are opportunities there that carry, again, other costs. So there's so many options, there's so many directions we could go in with a blank canvas in many ways. But the canvas we start with is a beautiful project, and it's the fully funded budgeted project. So do we want to stay there? Do we want to stretch out a little bit? Do we, what are we interested in? So from our perspective, whether it's something active or passive, if it's enhanced beyond what we currently have budgeted, one way or the other, the Cultural Arts Department will be participating in that process and looking for, what are the funding opportunities. Nothing's going to be paid for fully by a grant. Nothing's going to be paid for fully by an endowed gift or something, but there are opportunities for us to work together and figure that out. But we have to know where to start, and knowing how you're all feeling will help that out a great deal. I'll end it on this one. This is a good example of a daytime, nighttime experience that is very successful. This happens to be in Las Vegas, but it could just as easily be in Normal, Illinois, celebrating something like our trees. We're at Tree City, USA. We have a long legacy of trees in Normal, but this is actually an art installation. It is not a real tree. By day, it looks like a beautiful sculpture. The Children's Discovery Museum part of me says with swings on it and having some really fun interactive activities that are happening there. But also at night, it becomes an LED experience, and you can light those for the seasons. They can literally reflect nature. They can reflect different colors for the seasons, for the holidays, for awareness months and things like that. So it's an example of what could be a iconic structure if we wanted to go that direction in the space. There's certainly room for it, but again, not budgeted. So, again, looking for some direction.
Right. So that's throwing it all on the table for council to react to and give us some thoughts. So basically, two things that we thought you may or may not have an opinion on. And one is the underpass, and what do you want that experience to be? And then, of course, the plaza area. Are you comfortable with keeping it the passive space, or would you like to see something more? And if it's something more, does it make sense to to start planning to partner with the Children's Discovery Museum Foundation as a potential extension of the museum exhibit space? Or is it an art piece that we can plug into our public art plan? And what does that look like and the like? So, but bottom line is we're very, very proud of the design we have so far. We're proud of it. We just also want to not miss any opportunity. So if there's an opportunity now to prepare for special lighting, special art, then we want to prepare for that. So that's it. It's all on the table.
I'll start with some comments on it, because I think I would like to see, establishing a unique sense of place out of both of these entities, and maybe tied together somehow. Not all three, but maybe the north to the tunnel and then something different on the other side. I guess my concern is the size of the space. If you make it active, you're going to, my concern is it's going to be single use because there's not a lot of space there. And I want to shy away from that personally. This is my personal thing. I'll reflect back, and this is something for you all to think about. When we did the Uptown Circle, there was quite a battle on whether or not to have a water feature or not have a water feature. And you can imagine what that space would be like without that water feature right now. It would be just another roundabout in another city. So I want to take that lesson that we learned and apply that kind of thinking to what we're trying to do here. Some kind of decorative lighting, fun lighting for the underpass itself, I think is something we can do. It doesn't have to be Dale Chihuly kind of work. Sorry, there are not many people that know that. But
Could we?
I think there's some creative solutions out there that we could do to make it playful, to make it inviting. So that's kind of my direction. I'm not going to say exactly what we should do, do this and don't do that. But again, I think I'm nervous about making the North Plaza a completely active space because that's all it's going to be because of the size of it. Kevin?
Thank you. Thanks for all of this. Get our creative juices flowing. Some cool ideas, and we can't do the O'Hare lighting unless we have that weird psychedelic music that they play nonstop in that space in O'Hare. It's kind of creepy. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of
It's
creepy.
a lot longer than ours. Ours is about 84 feet, right?
Yeah.
Long.
Yes. I guess starting there in the tunnel, have we considered, so let me back up, 10,000 foot view. I agree, a very, very well lit wow kind of experience as you go through. I think it's an opportunity for public art there. Some of the examples were cool. Only one did I see where there was in-ground lighting used as a traffic separator through the tunnel, which is an interesting concept without painting stuff on the ground. But an interesting concept I hadn't really seen used before in a tunnel size or a trail type of project. To that end, public art and the changing and evolution of it, and how do we do it, and permanent, not permanent inside of a structure like this. Have we thought about, does it exist to use large scale digital lighting, wall lighting, where it can be electronic message, digital art shown and evolved and changed on a wall or a portion of a wall, and also be a large scale light source in the tunnel itself? We seen that?
It certainly exists,
Does it? Okay.
but we're at the point now with.
I'm sure that's amazingly affordable too.
Yes. Well, and sometimes where we are right now, we've talked about this, is if we're going to go to an enhanced level like that, we have to make considerations in how we're running conduit now while we're building it, right? And
Kind of
that would
unmask it.
have, and even if we're to raise money or do other things to fund a bigger installation later, some of those things should be decided now so that we're being smart about our spending and
So we
not
brought
making it hard on
the
ourselves.
practical voice of reason of our creative sides here, the engineer, to tell us some input here.
It's certainly possible at this point to set the underpass up for some future installation. We would need to be pretty specific about what our goal is for that area in terms of conduit, electrical requirements.
Wait.
Weight is certainly a consideration given the nature that we're carrying an active Class 1 railroad over the top of us.
Yeah.
So everything would need to be designed, signed off on, and fabricated to meet those specs.
And of course, I don't have any kind of level of detail, but when we start to think about art and we start to think about the evolution of art or new art, or how do we provide for it without a construction project every time we want to change something or do something different? And does a digital concept meet that opportunity, both from an evolving and changing art exhibit to a light source all at the same time? So don't have any other detailed thoughts. Personally, not a big fan of that uplight arch thing. Seen way too much of that in the subway stations in Chicago, and it just doesn't seem to age well over time. So I could be just jaded, and maybe there's much better ways of doing that these days. But in the plaza, I guess I don't want it to be that. I would like it. I would love to see us do more. I think there's a better opportunity, I guess, than that. I guess I don't have as much reservation as you do, Mayor, on the play, although I don't see that being a full-scale playground type of a thing.
We're not saying playground.
Yeah.
Right.
We're saying an active area. Yeah.
I didn't get that you were, but I wanted to make sure I put that out there in case I was misinterpreting
I
the
think in a
intention.
perfect world, we're thinking, photo opportunity with play
Mhm.
that's part of it. Scope of it, scale of it, we would have to discuss.
But something I think that would also invite a passive use of it and an appreciation of it, rather than it becoming a principally, kids running around, adults also sitting, having lunch or what have you. So I guess I'm some kind of a balance. I don't know what that looks like or what that means.
A big lighted tree with swings on it.
Maybe that's it. A little bit of play opportunity with a whole lot of passive use and a beautiful space. But yeah, I don't have any more thoughts for you on the plaza than that at the moment.
Karen?
This is all so intriguing. In terms of that space there, I have one request that we don't make it impossible not to have the Santa's workshop there. I can speak for a perpetual child in my household that seeks it out once Halloween comes and looks forward to when it's going to pop up. So I would just be mindful of not losing some traditions as we make these changes.
Hold on, Karen, I do want to jump in and say, in this plaza, the space we're looking at on screen right now, the Santa's workshop building wouldn't have a place here, but we haven't forgotten about the experience in a way to accommodate that particular activity and event. So we'll find a solution to figure out where can Santa's workshop be and how can we have a comparable or even better experience for the holiday season.
We talk a lot about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Santa's hut could possibly relocate to the south side.
Yeah.
As long as you can see it from the road and I don't have to get out in the cold to show it to her.
It's just not possible to get it into that space because you have the ramps now, the railings.
Okay.
It takes some very specific large equipment to move it in.
The
reindeer hopefully will be able to pull it elsewhere within the same area.
And then in terms of the tunnel space and actually all of the space, I would really like to see opportunities for changing exhibits where instead of simply focusing on permanent placement of any artwork, that we invite artists to display works in that space, and that it brings people down for the opportunity to see what the current artist is presenting. And I think I had mentioned to you that if there's even in the tunnel space, if there's display cases that could be decorated with lights for, like, department store windows used to be at Christmas time, for that changing display to show what's out there, just so that there's a sense of tradition, but also a chance to see, well, what's new that we're bringing here. And then on the lighting, what kind of things are you keeping in mind for someone who's autistic or epileptic and they have to be concerned about certain lights being overwhelming or triggering seizures, so what kind of things do you have to keep in mind for that?
Well, we are working with lighting experts to help us with that, because that was a question that we'd already brought up, that this is a space that is a shared space, it's a public space, so we have to think about those things. But fluorescent lights, we've gotten better than that, for instance, and more precise in how we light space. So I don't have an answer immediately for you on what that answer is, but we are talking about it.
And I echo Kevin's idea of the lighting directing traffic in the floor as you're going through the tunnel, so people know to keep right when they're using that space, because it is pretty wide. So you could get people who forget that they are a large group and are clombing across and making it impossible for others to either get around them or go in the opposite direction. So the lighting would be a subliminal, hey, we're outside our boundaries here. But I do know who Chihuly is, and I hope I can pronounce him correctly. But boy, having a
expensive.
Chihuly display in that space, let's start the fundraising now.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
5 years ago.
So I have a question then. So when you're thinking about sculpture, I'm assuming in the Plaza area of the different displays that you're hoping to see, are you thinking smaller, multiple small ones, or one large one?
I think
Because that's a question I think any of you could also answer.
I really liked the giant tree, but then we'd be copying someone. But I think whatever you put, we need to really get a small child in the planning so we don't wind up with a wading pool that we occasionally get on the circle right now, where that fountain is not supposed to be used as swimming pool, but it is. So with whatever we do there, we have to say, now what would a 6-year-old do with this?
Anything that's humanly possible.
Very well.
Kathleen?
Well, let's put a big cardboard box and see what they do with that. Okay, so I've made notes of things that have been said, and I think I generally am along the lines of what has been said so far. I'm going to ask a couple questions, if that's okay. When you're starting to look at, some enhanced lighting, more creative lighting, and when you're starting to look at maybe something like that really cool tree, I did like that with the swing, yeah. What are you talking about in round numbers? And then maybe what kind of grant opportunities are out there for things like that? So if you can speak to me a little bit about what we might be climbing into and what possible revenue sources we could look at.
I can't speak to the enhanced lighting per se in the underpass as far as how much more, but right now, do you want to talk about the current budget?
Yeah, the current budget is, somewhere in the realm of $150,000 to $200,000
Okay.
for that. Particularly the lighting and the aesthetics, whether that is some sort of wall treatment to dress up the concrete walls. It's going to be a concrete box, so the plain bare walls will be concrete. Color, look, there'll be a joint at the center because we're doing a clamshell type design where the top half will be set on the bottom half. So there is money in the budget to have some wall treatments in terms of paneling and things to enhance that area. So, and Mr. Reese also mentioned there's money in the budget for some sort of pavers on the bottom, so you won't be walking on the actual concrete bottom as well. And certainly drainage and everything that goes along with it will be considered and is in the budget.
So within that budget, we can do some very beautiful light.
Okay.
But if we want to commission a mural, if we want to have some other type of actual art installation in the space, whether it's lighting itself or just a well-lighted art piece, painted piece, that would be, well over another $300,000, $400,000 likely. Just really depends on the quality of the artist, and I would highly recommend we consider, if we were going to do that, a professional artist doing a mural. There are cost materials that have stood the test of time that we would want to rely on, and none of those really come cheap. So a great example of a professionally done mural that has become popular and has stood up well in our region, that had a combination of private and public dollars, are the Wall Dog murals in Pontiac, right? Those are highly photographed for Route 66 around the world. Those are 20 years old or so now, right now, I believe. And that's a good example of working with a professional team that knows their materials, knows the scope and scale of what they're working in. They're not arriving, with a team of high schoolers, and nothing wrong with high school art by any means, but when you're looking at an installation and an investigation or an investment of this size, you want to consider that. So that's why I put that price out there.
Okay.
When we did some early, so the exterior play pieces were part of the exhibit's master plan that the Children's Discovery Museum and the Foundation worked on. And some early specs on the large scale is about $500,000 for the full installation. That would include design and everything. And then the smaller pieces it just depends on what direction we're going in.
Okay. And then grant opportunities, are these kind of things out there to support something like this or partially support something like this?
There are, placemaking is a really important part of some corporate and foundation grants we could try to go after. For the Children's Discovery Museum Foundation, there would have to be some component of activity and play associated with it to apply for that grant.
Okay.
On the town side, if we wanted to go strictly art or passive, there are federal grants, there are some state grants. State grants are not as hefty, but sometimes you get surprised. It's a little bit of it. From our perspective, the more shovel-ready we can be and knowing what it is that we're hoping for, is more likely that we could be successful at getting grants. And part of that is answering the question of, well, and is there a match? Is the town, willing to fund a certain extent? So right now, the most recent grant we could have applied for would have required a 50% match.
Okay.
And that was up to $500,000.
Okay.
But that's still real money, right? Real dollars to go after. So those are just some basic examples.
Okay.
I would say a significant installation like the tree, that would be LED lighted and things like that. That could be close to $1 million.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Of course I like
but
that.
that's using some very high level technology experiences. We don't have to go to that scale to achieve something that we like in our space. And as the mayor pointed out, it's not a huge space. So what we do there will not be quite at the Las Vegas scale.
Yeah.
They have a whole desert.
And how big is that space roughly? What are we that we're looking at there?
That's a great question. I will have to get back to you on
Okay.
that.
All right. And then the last question I have is about the public art plan. Generally, what have we or what is a rule of thumb to assign to projects for public art?
The gold standard is 1%.
1%. That's what I thought.
1% of the public budget is typically what is reserved for art.
Right, right. So when I did the math, and I just did it on, if you look at 25 million, you're looking at $250,000. So is that going to buy us something? I mean, that's why I was kind of getting at what we think we could get.
Well, certainly, yes, it could get
Yeah.
us something. It just
Yeah,
depends
yeah.
on, again, I think once we have a direction of what council and mayor are wanting to see, we could get some better answers for what different amounts
Okay.
might be able to achieve. Because, again, working smart on this end, if we're thinking the way that you want us to, in the direction that you're wanting to go at this point, we'll be having those considerations and lighting and making those decisions in the current budget as they sit versus the way it's currently presented.
Yeah.
We can be planning for the future.
And it also allows Mr. Otto and the design team to plan for whatever installations might be needed down the road in terms
In
of conduit,
anticipation. Yeah.
utility access, things like that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and Parks and Recreation, right? So,
For
you know,
sure.
this is a space that a lot of departments will eventually touch because
yeah.
we collaborate in those
Yeah.
areas.
So just in wrap up, I would say that, you know, I don't like that either. And I'm not a big fan of just buff. So, you know, so I think we need to think about the fact that this is a significant project, much like the north side was. And, you know, you want to do it right. And so I think we need to look at ways to enhance the Children's Discovery Museum. I like the idea of some outdoor extension, whatever that might look like. Something like Mr. McCarthy said, as far as maybe a balance between what, you know, children of all ages might like, young and old. I think we need to do something, I guess would be my statement.
Okay.
I think that I appreciate all the comments and the thought process, and I've heard many of these comments from you individually, so it's nice to hear them as a group so you can hear thoughts. I don't know who's controlling the PowerPoint here, super secret, but if we could go back to the one that is, you know, shows both north and south sides. I do think almost there we go. This alone is, you can just take a moment and say, wow. I mean, it's going to be amazing. And so just the idea of moving forward with this and, you know, the funding partners that we have and how this is progressing is pretty amazing. It is a major team effort. And I just want to thank staff for leading the team at this point. It's exciting. And I think this is kind of a great visual to give you some concept of what's coming down the pike and what a, I don't know, transformational space the plaza on both the north side and south side of the tracks is going to be in the not too distant future. So it's pretty amazing. So
All right.
thank you for sharing your thoughts. And thank you, team. And stay tuned. We'll keep moving forward.
I like them all, so we just need to know what you all like.
All right, we've got notes, and we'll get together as a staff and start moving forward with what we heard.
Go
So
ahead.
if we're ready, we'll just slide into the next agenda topic, and that is the American Rescue Plan Act. I've had an opportunity to kind of give a sneak preview to some of you to explain what we want to cover this evening. And we have a special guest, so I'll invite her forward in a moment. But we have, as you all know, we received $10 million from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan Act, and we have allocated much of those resources in our current budget. We are required to have all of our funds allocated by December of 2024. So certainly we have time to allocate that. We have to have them spent by December of 2026. However, we are moving into our fiscal year 23-24 budget process. And as staff is starting to put together our budget, we'll go over the details with you in January at a budget work session, and certainly in December, we will share the community investment plan with you. But what that means for staff is we would like to start moving forward with a little more detail on how to allocate those funds for budgeting purposes. So the discussion tonight pertains primarily to the amount of and I always refer to it as ARPA, stands for American Rescue Plan Act, but the balance of our ARPA funds is how best to start budgeting for those. And so we have a presentation this evening, and I'm going to invite Ms. Duncan to come forward. Erin Duncan is our guest. She and I have been speaking as a group and individually for quite some time, most of this calendar year, talking about this particular initiative. And I've shared it with council in emails and the like. Earlier this year, the city of Bloomington, the town, United Way, the Home Sweet Home Mission, and Prairie State Legal Services came together in conversations as representative of the Housing Coalition to talk about the need for a position that has been referred to as a housing navigator. And Ms. Duncan is going to explain a little bit more about that particular position this evening. And on behalf of the Housing Coalition, a proposal was made to both the city and the town to use some of our ARPA funds to fund the position. So I'm going to ask Ms. Duncan to go over the coalition proposal, and then the outcome of our work session this evening is I'd like to talk to council a little bit about how to allocate our remaining funds. We had about 1.5 million unallocated in the current budget when it was adopted. We used 100,000 of those funds to put toward the Carl Mobile Health Clinic. And then now that we're into our budget process and design for some of our capital investments, specifically the Fort Jesse Road intersections of Fort Jesse and Landmark, Fort Jesse and Greenbrier, we've determined that the current budget is probably not adequate. We need a little bit more money for both of those intersections. We intend to use a little bit of those dollars in our updated budget, as well as Savannah Green neighborhood a little bit more. So when we supplement those currently budgeted projects a little bit more based on design and our projections, that leaves us with 975,000 of our ARPA funds that have yet to be allocated. And so following Ms. Duncan's presentation and discussion about that, then I'll talk to council a little bit more about how I would hope to move forward with our budget. So with that, Ms. Duncan, thank you for being here this evening. And she's with Prairie State Legal and has been a great resource and certainly a great representative of the Housing Coalition and has some terrific information to share. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Again, I'm Erin Duncan, so I'm a staff attorney with Prairie State Legal Services. I've been there a little bit over a year. And for the past year, I've mainly been manning the eviction clinic at the courthouse. So we've got attorneys who are there at the courthouse along with some volunteer attorneys where we meet with people and provide them advice at that point of contact when they're facing eviction. I've recently pivoted roles into sort of a broader scope opportunity in our Justice, Equity, and Opportunity program. And I am the co-chair of this housing coalition that was convened by United Way in response to the pandemic. But that coalition has continued, and you'll see the names of some of our folks there on the slide. Representatives from these different groups have come and gone to some extent, but it's still a pretty robust coalition, mainly of social service agencies. And what we've found is that a lot of what the pandemic response brought up is that there were pre-existing problems that were exacerbated by the pandemic, and then new problems, supply chain problems, some great economic growth in our community, but that has led to folks moving into houses that are then pushing out folks who maybe could have afforded a house but now can't anymore because those home prices are going up. So we've got low-income renters who aren't able to afford to buy or sometimes to rent anymore. So a lot of those compounding pressures is what we're looking at. And we realize that there's a limited pot of money for social services from ARPA funds. What I think is great about this project is that it is a coalition project. A lot of these agencies have already been working together on this issue and agree that this is a real need and somewhere where we can meet a need with this Housing Navigator project. We think that it is something that aligns with other agencies with our current agency projects, but it doesn't overlap, and I'll get into that a little bit more. You know, in my work, I really confront poverty daily, and that looks like a lot of different things. So it can mean somebody who is in shelter or who's living on the street. It can mean somebody who's doubled up, living with family members, but it's really not a sustainable situation. People living in cars, somebody who's maybe on a month-to-month lease or their lease expired and they're on a fixed income, or lost a job and are now back to work but got a little bit behind. And in those sorts of situations, you know, like the eviction numbers don't always tell the whole story. So somebody on a month-to-month lease, they get a notice, a 30-day notice. If it's given properly, they don't have a defense to eviction. If, you know, they've got to move out at the end of 30 days. And then they're confronting that rental market that I was just mentioning, which is a very difficult market right now. It also looks like, some of you may have heard the WGLT radio piece recently where some renters were describing living in situations that are really not habitable. You know, poor housing conditions, but feeling like they can't rock the boat because they don't want to end up having to move because of a bad relationship with their landlord and then move into this really difficult housing market. We also have some protections that have expired. So there was pandemic protection related to ceiling eviction cases where they wouldn't be public records. That has now gone away. We can sometimes still see a case by agreement, but that is more rare now. And so people are ending up with an eviction on a public record. And when you've got landlords who, you know, reasonably are looking at a market where a lot of people are buying for a single apartment, that person may not be able to get into new housing at that point. And that one eviction on their record doesn't tell the whole story of what happened, right? They had medical debt or they had a COVID-related hardship or something and they got behind and they couldn't avoid eviction. We're also looking at a lot of high shelter numbers right now. So we work closely with Home Sweet Home and Salvation Army. And Matt Burgess, who leads Home Sweet Home, couldn't be here tonight, but he's worked closely with me on this project. And even as eviction numbers downticked a little bit, because there was a big surge after the moratorium expired, so there was sort of a backlog where evictions weren't being filed. Then a bunch of them got filed. It's gone down a bit again, but you've got to look at the big picture over the last, 4 or 5 years. When they've gone down from the surge that happened, but they haven't gone down below pre-pandemic levels. In any case, if they've gone down a little bit, the shelter numbers at the same time are going up. And so you can see there's sort of a mismatch there. You might think that those things would align if the eviction numbers were going down, that shelter numbers would also be going down, but they're going up and they are high. They are at waiting lists at this point. There are folks who need shelter who are street homeless, who cannot be housed right now in our community. So getting on to sort of what we're thinking of, at least temporary solution of sorts could look like. Whoops, see if I can advance this properly. There we go. So I guess I should have started on this slide here. We can see some of the problem there that we were just talking about. And one of the things at the bottom in the red there, you'll see no existing service to navigate things and that general overwhelm, right? So that's what we're seeing with these clients when I'm describing, the folks that we are encountering. There are some resources available. We have a great community with a lot of these agencies who are trying to work on these problems and help people with resources. But there's a lot of overwhelm for folks who are in that space of trauma. I provide a legal service. Home Sweet Home provides a housing service. Salvation Army provides some housing in the form of shelter and also sometimes some emergency financial assistance. There's some different little pots of money for different types of emergency assistance. But if you are about to lose your home or you are homeless and you're looking at all of these applications and what to do next and facing that housing market, it's really overwhelming. And none of us currently in these agencies who are part of this coalition are specifically trained or situated to provide this service of helping navigate all of the rest of it, right? I just closed a case and I was looking at my time on the case. I put 40 hours into this case, which is atypical for, helping somebody with an eviction case. That's quite a few hours for legal services. And it's because I was trying to help this person who was elderly and has some disabilities try to track down where her Social Security card is and how to get her a statement for $100 a month pension so that she could try to apply for some resources and some additional housing. And there's all of those little pieces that somebody else would probably be better situated to handle so that I can focus on the legal problem, right? We can get the next slide there. So what we're proposing is a demonstration project, essentially, to have a person who would be housing navigator, is what we're calling this title, for a period of 3 years. And the idea is to demonstrate that this could work, that this could provide some relief in our community, and then we would be looking towards trying to make this a more sustainable venture. And so we're seeking funding for 3 years, there we go, at the salary of, well, it wouldn't be a salary of $75,000. That $75,000 accounts for the benefits package as well, supervision, all of that. And I will add here that we have identified that Mid-Central Community Action is able and willing to be the agency to host this position. So that was probably not in your materials. That's been a recent development. They have already a program, and I want to get the name right here, their Financial Opportunity Center, I believe is what it is, yep, where they seek grants already for programs that they offer out of that center. They've got a structure in place. They have folks who can supervise this new role. What we're looking for is essentially seed funding for this new role so that we can get somebody started in it. And that person would essentially be the expert, right? They're the ones who know which landlords take Section 8 vouchers, although we will have source of income protection coming into play in January. But I am finding that even if landlords will take a Section 8 voucher per se, the costs aren't lining up right now, right? So they're wanting to be competitive in the market, and Section 8 can't afford to pay the rate that they're asking. So those are things that this person would be the expert on, and they would know, exactly who will do permanent and supportive housing. What are the programs that have some housing available? Project Oz and Chestnut have ways that they can place people, but in a limited scope. And so who's going to qualify for those programs? If you are a single person on a fixed income, or if you're a family with 5 children, there's no one size fits all about what will be the best housing situation. And so this person would be that expert, essentially. And then if we could get the next bullet point there, we're also asking for some startup funds. So I have mentioned that there's other assistance that's already available in the community. A lot of those pots in the last year have dried up, but hopefully there will be some more rental assistance funds, other emergency funds that come up. But we are finding that a lot of those have a lot of strings attached, with good reason. But sometimes there are situations where, somebody couldn't prove something that they needed to they couldn't prove that they were street homeless, for example. So HUD has these categories, category 1 or 4 homeless. And if you can't qualify as that category, if you decided to couch surf instead of going and setting up a tent, you don't qualify for certain funds. And so giving this navigator a little pot of unrestricted funds would be helpful. I think the idea behind that would be exhausting, other resources first, so they're not dipping into that pot first. That's because they're the expert. They're going to know all of the other agencies, all of the other pots of money first. But if they can't solve a problem, and an extra $600 would create a bridge for somebody getting into the next place, getting actually moved rather than having to become street homeless in order to then access those funds. That's a huge benefit to our community, to create those sorts of bridges, because if you look at the toll on social services, and certainly, of course, the disruption to that person's life for having to actually become street homeless, that's what we're talking about. So it really is a preventative program, and I think it's an opportunity for us to be leaders in prevention. There are other communities that have something called housing navigators. A lot of them are focused more on trying to eliminate chronic homelessness, which is certainly a real issue and would be part of this as well. They keep lists, and we have this in our community where we keep lists of people with names who turn up again and again who are chronically homeless. That's really important to know about, but it's also important that we're working towards making sure more people don't become chronically homeless. Right? So this would be a program, like I said, of Mid-Central Community Action at this point is who we've identified would be taking it on, but it would continue to be a collaborative process as well with the coalition, leveraging all of those resources to meet the need. And we do want to acknowledge, of course, that this is, part of a bigger picture solution. There certainly is a need for more affordable housing. I know that you all know that and are working towards those goals as well. But because that's going to take a while for housing to be built and to be really responsive to the needs of different types of community members, we think that this would be a way for the community to better know about what's available currently and better leverage those resources that we have currently, rather than having people leave the community, frankly, because it's not affordable to live here anymore. And these are just some of the key determinant pieces. Let's see. I think we've got one more bullet point there, if we could put that up. Thank you. So housing as a key determinant of health, right? So these ARPA funds, want to focus on behavioral health, access to health. Housing is a key determinant of all of these things. I was talking before about, the toll on social services if we don't have that safety net for folks. And really a little bit of extra funding now can prevent a much greater toll later on a person's mental health, on their physical health, on our community health. So we do think that it is really aligned with the ARPA goals. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have about the project.
Lorenz, go right ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to jump in here first, if that's all right, and acknowledge that this touches on my day job with United Way. And much like Ms. Duncan said, she sees this day in and day out in her work with Prairie State Legal. These are the kind of conversations that I'm part of all the time. And, I was excited to hear that this would be brought forward to us. Unfortunately, this is not news to me, but I'm hoping that it is something that if you were not aware of these issues, that you have a better understanding of it now. We see data at United Way that drives what we do from a philanthropy point of view, where it's 24,000 households in McLean County are struggling with poverty or near poverty. That's 36%. And that figure has gone up by 72% since 2010. Now, there's lots of reasons why that's happened. We can speculate. We know some things for certain. But be that as it may, the issue is real. And now compounding on that, issues that we know we deal with a lot as far as the demand for housing outpacing the supply at any level of cost, has only exacerbated this situation. And that's why this coalition has stayed together, is because what used to work in the past and where there was enough hunger within landlords to say, yeah, okay, I'll take that tenant, or okay, yeah, I'm not at total capacity. Those days are over. And so that's why the group that has come together is really just seeking a community wide effort to try to address this community problem. And so I just wanted to say that up front, that this is something I've been dealing with, and I deal with every day and am exposed to every day, and it's real. And it's one of the reasons why from this table I have been a proponent of getting our hands around the housing issue. Because, we're 4,300 houses or rooftops short. And one would say, well, but you're not approving affordable housing, Kathleen. Well, it's all part of an ecosystem, and it's all, Econ 101, supply and demand curves, in the sense that the longer we are not meeting the demand, the more vulnerable, the more pressure there is on the most vulnerable, in the sense that landlords can be choosier in that kind of market. Opportunists can come along, maybe from within or out of town, and scoop up lower valued properties that was once affordable and start to do a little moderate flipping to it, and then charge a whole lot more rent. And so then that leaves the folks who are least able to have various options able to find stable housing. So when you didn't have these supply and demand pressures before, I think our regular social service system handled it okay. Was it great? No. Everybody's always been doing a piece of this. A little from Prairie State Legal, a little from PATH, a little from the shelters. But now that we've dialed up the pressure and the demand and supply are so out of whack, the old way of doing things is not working. And if you take nothing else away from this presentation today, I hope you have a better understanding of the critical nature of our housing situation at all levels. You know, it wasn't too many weeks ago that we were talking about $300,000 and $400,000 homes, you know, and, you know, I had probably just come from a meeting where we talked about the family of 10 who was being evicted later that day, and many of these entities were scrambling together, everything from school districts to Regional Office of Education to the shelters, trying to figure out a place to put that family of 10. So, you know, sometimes the dichotomy between some of the things we talk about is kind of stark. So I'll just leave it at that I hope, if nothing else, this is an educational and perhaps eye-opening opportunity for you. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just jump in real quickly, I appreciate your comments, Ms. Lorenz. I did want to share with council that obviously, since the conversations began a number of months ago, in those conversations was United Way, as well as Prairie State Legal and Home Sweet Home, as I mentioned earlier. And if we choose to move forward with funding of this type of position, an agreement would be between the town and Mid-Central Community Action as the recipient. So, you know, having discussed with Mr. Day, I did believe that Ms. Lorenz is a subject matter expert in this area, and there would be no agreement with United Way. I just wanted to share that we did have the conversation, and we appreciate your contribution as a subject matter expert in this area.
Go ahead. Oh, Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, you may have answered my question. So would the housing navigator be within Mid-Central Community Action then, so that would be their office space, that would be the line of reporting, and our resource for oversight would be through that entity?
Yes, and that's a new development. We had a couple of self-nominations from agencies within the committee. One withdrew, so that left Mid-Central. We think they're a great fit for it. They would do the hiring, and they would provide supervision and all of those things. I think the coalition might still help develop some metrics around outcomes. I think that this is something where they would be able to figure out, you know, outcomes in terms of their client management system. Did the person stay housed, or did they find new housing, or, you know, what are those sorts of things? But it would be employed by Mid-Central, and they've shared with me. Unfortunately, they couldn't attend tonight, and this did develop fairly recently, that they confirming that they would house it. They said that they're the only HUD-certified housing counseling agency in McLean County. They were already distributing those funds from the town of Normal and previously, and they look for their own grants as well. I think that they want it to be a sustainable position. This would help them to bring the position in-house, and then hopefully, you know, find ways to fund it moving forward.
And I recently met with Conan Calhoun with LifeSo, and he was bringing up that a new development in the rental market are landlords charging an application fee, even just to apply for an apartment that you may or may not have a shot at. Would there be the understanding that these funds could be made available to people who just want that kind of assistance Is that something that this program could support?
I think potentially. I mean, I think that that's the sort of thing that we're seeing with some of the restrictions where funds are not available for that sort of thing or for helping somebody to move. I run into a lot of clients who have disabilities and cannot physically move. They want to get out of the place they're in because they're, got a 30-day notice. Maybe they're not behind on rent. They just have to move because the landlord doesn't want to rent to them anymore. But then if they can't move by the deadline, they're facing eviction court because they couldn't, they didn't have the funds to hire a mover or something like that. So there are pieces like that. We run into things with people having to rehome their pets, and just there's a lot of things that current pots of money don't cover. And I'm not saying that that this position would necessarily cover that in every single instance for every case, but the navigator, I think, would have some flexibility with that additional pot of money we're talking about for those sorts of things.
And the example you mentioned of spending 40 hours on one case where you were getting pulled into a myriad of issues that were beyond the usual scope of just legal advice, how would that navigator position alleviate the specifics of that case? I mean, how could they intervene to pull away some of that work from you so that you're able to focus on your strong suit, the legal support?
Right. I think that it would be the warm handoff, right, which we already do between interagencies. And I just didn't have somebody to hand that particular problem off to in this case, somebody who could really hold this person's hand, walk them through this particular application process and figure out what documents they needed. The hope is that this person could help. Now, we're talking about potentially a slew of cases and work for this person, and they might not be able to spend the 40 hours on a case either. I think we would have to see, what does their caseload ultimately look like? And thinking big, it would be great if we have 2 or 3 housing navigators if the demonstration project works, right? But we didn't want to think too big before we see if it really works the way we're envisioning it.
And one of the things I think that can be confusing for people who don't know how to navigate bureaucracy is if they're advised to consult with somebody else, and then it seems like eventually they wind up coming back to the person they started with. Is there any plans for any kind of case management where one individual would ride herd on situations to see that if it is referred to multiple resources, that ultimately everybody is continuing to work together and there's a single point of contact for that person?
I think we're hoping that this person would sort of be that, maybe bringing them in and taking over as a co-chair for the coalition or something like that, doing this type of work where they really are continuing to collaborate with all of the agencies and hopefully being a case manager for folks. Because, again, I have a case in my office that is specific to a legal issue. And so there are going to be, sometimes it's unavoidable that they'll have multiple cases open at multiple places. But if we know that they're working with the navigator to figure out their situation, and once they are able to become more stably housed, then hopefully those other cases fall away. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. Very interesting concept, and I appreciate the information. Lots of questions, but I'll try to keep the most on a high level at this point. I imagine that's where we are with this conversation. So I guess at the outset, I'll just say I'm very interested and supportive of this idea. And so I'll just state that at the top, Mayor, if we're looking for that kind of input. So you've touched on a few things that I have questions about. And so I'm guessing that this type of position and idea exists elsewhere. We're not building a new mousetrap here.
Correct, yeah. Rockford in particular, we've looked at. I do think their model is a little bit more focused on the chronic homelessness, but I do think they have higher numbers of chronic homeless, and so that's sort of where they've focused their effort. But that's where we're trying to think a little bit bigger in terms of, also creating some more safety nets for people who are very housing unstable, maybe not yet chronically homeless. But it has worked elsewhere.
Okay. So this is, so we have models. to try to best case from. That's good to hear. And so these are existing competencies. We're not inventing a hybrid position where we have to grow competencies. This is people that have these kind of skills or knowledge of these programs to do this kind of work, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, Mid Central will have to do the hiring. I don't know who would ultimately land in that position. And the models are all a little bit different from our research. Sometimes there are housing navigators that are located out of hospitals, and so are helping people transition, in particular from the medical context back into housing. I think that's a great concept and idea too, but it's maybe more specific. But looking at all of those different models, this is sort of where we've landed as a community model. And I think that there's plenty out there that, especially with the support of the coalition, even though it would be housed at Mid Central, we've got this great resource of all of us who have been working on these issues to help define it. And again, that's why we've sort of said it's this demonstration project, right, is to, be leaders in developing a new model, but that has a good basis elsewhere.
Gotcha. Kind of a proof of concept specifically. Okay. Kind of a level of abstraction down. So you talked a little bit about, you touched on outcome metrics and evaluation criteria. And so talk to us a little bit more about that. So specific role definition, who's going to be doing that evaluation. And so there's the position demonstration. So does the position work as stated? What about the staff person?
Right.
Do we have the right staffing model as well, and those kinds of things, and how does that happen, and who does that, and then I guess even further, kind of what kind of reporting to an agency like ours do we anticipate? Feedback for us, so we kind of know what's going on and how it's going.
I think ultimately, now that we know that it's Mid Central that would host it, they would be the ones who are accountable to the funders. I do think they would also still be accountable to the coalition, having it grown out of it being a coalition project. And so, internally, it would be within this center that already exists, this Financial Opportunity Center. I don't want to shuffle papers too much because I've got a little bit of information from them, and we can try to follow up with them to provide some more details as well. But my understanding is that they've got several levels of supervision already within that center with folks who are doing other sort of financial counseling, credit counseling, other things that they're working on. And so I think that they would, the metrics have to be developed. It's sort of been a chicken and an egg problem, really, that because we didn't know if we had any funding, we couldn't put, all of us are sort of stretched pretty thin already in these social service agencies. And so we have tried to develop as much as we can without, developing the whole project before we knew if we could be funded.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And so, I love this concept and I'm supportive of it, but I imagine seeing the list of everybody participating in this coalition that role definition might be a problem, and projects creep, and how do we define the success of their time and all of those. So I'm just trying to get a grasp of how we see that happening. I don't imagine all those questions are answered because you don't have any money to sort that out yet, but just trying to get a little bit of sense of that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Mr. Nord?
Thank you. The pandemic's not over. We're not back to where we were before. There's still businesses that are still struggling to find employees. There's still people that have not returned back to work. So in light of that, say you start this and then people do start going back to work and there's not really a need for this service any longer. When do we know when to pull the plug on it?
I think ultimately that will probably be a question for Mid Central. That we're seeking again that sort of seed funding to start the project. I don't think we're going to be out of it in the 3 years that we're asking for. When we look at how entrenched some of these problems are, and that you talk about somebody who has a medical emergency or something like that, and suddenly they're in a much more vulnerable financial position than they've ever been in before. Let's say a non-pandemic related a medical emergency. There's a lot of reasons why people are in poverty or become impoverished if they haven't experienced that before. And while we do have these great social service agencies, evictions were at 70 per month, I believe, is before the pandemic, which is still a high number for people to be facing housing instability. And so what we're talking about is a pretty long-term project to try to lift people out of that situation.
Okay, because what I'm looking at is like number of people you're helping per number of staff, because if you're helping 3 people and you've got 4 staff members, that's the measurement that I'm looking for, is to say, hey, is this really still feasible? Because maybe those couple people can be helped by another group, and instead of continuing to tax people more, because the more we grow government, the more we increase poverty, because those people that are right at the level of poverty or not, once they get more taxes, they immediately get pushed into the poverty level. The other question, though, for like...
Can I just respond to that really
Sure.
quickly? So, I mean, right now, we're talking about just one navigator. I know I mentioned maybe expanding it. I think that the expansion would only be based on if we were seeing in the numbers and the metrics, that there was a greater need. Otherwise, there's no need to expand it. But when you're looking at what we're talking about, numbers of people, and again, not all housing unstable people in the county are facing eviction. But what I have in front of me from my numbers from Prairie State are 804 in 2018, that's McLean County eviction case filings, 837 in 2019. Then the moratorium was in place, and we're projected to be in those same numbers, 800 to 850 by the end of this year. That's a lot of people. And again, we have one person that we're talking about. We don't want to overload that person, but I don't think it's going to be a question that there's not enough need.
And then the township is typically tasked with general assistance, with helping with the indigent. That is their statutory responsibility. I'm not opposed to the idea of the services, because we do need services. It's just, is this the proper level of government, or is it the township? Because that's who's supposed to be addressing these types of issues anyway.
So my understanding is the townships have typically 2 pots: the general assistance funds, where somebody has lost their income, maybe they're waiting on a unemployment insurance decision or a Social Security disability decision. They haven't gotten that decision yet. They can access, I believe it's around $350 per month. I don't want to misspeak. And then the emergency assistance pot, at least in normal, requires people to have minor children in the household. So right there, that's a string attached that leaves out a huge lot of people. And it's a great program, but it is one of those programs that unfortunately does have some of those strings attached and is not always going to be able to help the situations that we're talking about. So I understand that concern, but I'm not sure that the township is going to always be able to meet the need.
Is the township, well, have you talked to the township about being able to adjust those limitations?
I haven't personally. I can follow up on that and talk to them about that.
Yeah, because if it's an existing system, I'd rather tweak this existing system rather than create something else.
I think it's an issue of person power too. The township is not going to have, they're part of our coalition as well. And none of the members of the coalition at this point have stepped up. And in all of those agencies on that first slide, nobody stepped up and said, we have an extra employee, an extra person who can help, hold people's hands through navigating all of this really difficult process so that they, don't fall further into poverty.
Sure, which I understand that, but you're asking for the money for that additional person, and then that could then be fitting within that existing structure and get whatever support they have. So, it'd be shifting funds. So if they do need that person, it goes to that existing entity.
You're saying situating a similar role in township, maybe instead of mid-central?
If that's, because if that's what they're tasked for, is for general assistance, and if they do need more staff for it, they could always ask us, hey, could you give us a little bit of that funding for this, because it's going to help your residents as well. That I think is reasonable, and then the other municipalities that fall under those townships within the county, they could equally contribute a little, because I would recommend you say, hey, township X, whichever township it is, manage this for the entire county, if the entire county is going to be contributing to it.
That's feedback I'll bring to the coalition. Township, as members of the coalition, have not put out a self-nomination at this point. So
yeah, and another thing is it's very confusing to understand where to go. So the more pointers we have for people to go, then people don't go for help because then they just feel overwhelmed. They don't know where to go. You know, so minimizing that by not creating another pointer that nobody's ever heard of is kind of my goal.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on some of my subject matter expertise or offer it here to add to what Ms. Duncan's already said. The Bloomington Township, I believe, is a member of the coalition and attends and is aware of the work being developed. And there was not a desire or a suggestion made on their part that this is something that they're already able to do. So I think what maybe Mr. Nord you might be getting at is, does this concept or model, is it hosted by an agency like a Mid-Central Community Action, or is it hosted by the township? Since they didn't self-nominate to be the host organization, I take that to mean that they're not in a position to be able to do that. So I just wanted to make that clear.
I'd like to just respond.
Or go
I don't
ahead.
want to make these decisions based on I think. I just recommend, please ask, because if you come back to me to ask for money, I'm going to ask the same questions. Did you ask these folks? And depending on your answer is going to be the way that I'm going to vote. So I hope you say, yes, we talked with them. They said, no, we would rather you guys do it, because then that's going to make my decision easier to make, because you have asked the questions that basically I'm asking you to ask. Thanks.
I understand, thank you.
Ms. Reese, so what are we looking for here tonight?
Sure. A couple things. I certainly hear what you're saying, Mr. Nord. I've made comments I've made notes of council's comments about this particular topic. Appreciate your input and your thoughts for everyone, so we know where you stand on this particular position. We're not asking council tonight to specifically say, yes, we're going to fund it X amount of dollars. To know that there's some level of support so we can move forward and plan for this is what I'm seeking. So I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. Mid-Central Community Action, just for awareness, is an agency whose one of their primary responsibilities is to assist with CDBG programs in our housing assistance, and we've relied heavily on them through COVID and appreciate their level of expertise. So I am actually pleased to hear that Mid-Central Community Action would be the housing agency if we chose to move forward. The ask has been $400,000 ultimate total combined for the position and for seed funding. I don't know if that's where we'll end up, because this would be in partnership with the city of Bloomington. In my conversations with the city and with the representatives that I've spoken with, I've indicated that it likely would not be a 50-50 share of how that would be split, but we are talking about what that would look like. So I can't tell you an exact dollar amount this evening, but with nods and kind of the feel I'm getting from council, I do feel like we will continue to move forward then and budget accordingly. And I'll have further conversations with Bloomington and Ms. Duncan, and we'll move forward and come back to you when we're ready with an agreement. But what I'm also looking for this evening is, as shared when I introduced this topic, is we're going into the budget process, preparing fiscal year 23-24, which sounds a long way off, but it is just right around the corner. When you can remember Y2K, fiscal year 23-24 just sounds wow. But, and of course, we do a 5-year budget projection. So staff would like to start plugging these initiatives into our upcoming proposed budget. Of our remaining $975,000 from our American Rescue Plan allocation, what I'm asking of council, if there's support for staff to plan for retaining about $200,000 of that amount in for social needs, social service, things like Housing Navigator and other type of social support, about 200 grand to allocate. And then that would leave us 775,000 remaining that we would then begin to program for infrastructure and capital. I can't tell you specifically what that would be, but that's sort of the buckets that we're looking at right now in terms of focusing an additional 775 for capital infrastructure and 200 toward the social side. So if council's generally comfortable with that approach, we'll start looking at that in terms of our programming and the budget, and then come back to you with specifics. And obviously, even when things are budgeted, we can modify as needed, but this would help us get ready as we're putting together the proposed 23-24 budget.
That strikes me as a reasonable solution. You know, and those numbers can shift a tiny bit one way or another, but to remind everybody, there are restrictions on what we can and cannot do with the ARPA dollars, and staff's very well aware of that, so it certainly has my support to go forward that way. Further? Thank you.
And
Thank you.
that's all the topics we have. So we put a lot on the table this evening. I appreciate your time and your interest in sharing your thoughts on these things. And there's a little bit of food in the back if
Yep.
you're hungry before the meeting starts.
Take a motion for adjournment.
A second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Nord,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
With a mouthful of water, says aye. We are adjourned. We'll be back at 7 o'clock.